Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to sportswriter Jonah Keri, author of the second best book ever written about the former Tampa Bay Devil Rays, The Extra 2%, How Wall Street Strategies Took a Major League Baseball Team from Worst to First. Stick around. If you don't, I'll read the best book about the Rays aloud to you instead.
Hey, did you know that you can listen to the latest Mr. Media on your phone with the Stitcher app? Stitcher is smart radio for your smartphone. Mr. Media is on demand and on the go with Stitcher. Download Stitcher for your phone today. Get the free download at Stitcher.com. That's STITCHER.com.
So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview. You know, MrMedia.com, MRmedia.com. Stop by and check it out. There are nearly 700 archived celebrity interviews for your listening pleasure. The show is brought to you today by thepartyauthority.us. Planning a wedding, mitzvah, or corporate event? For any and all occasions, call the Party Authority nationwide at 1-800-DIAL-DJs. That's 1-800-342-5357, where one call does it all. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience of baseball fans who secretly wish Joe Madden was their team's manager in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. Now, I was a little nervous about the publication of Jonah Keri's new book, The Extra 2%, How Wall Street Strategies Took a Major League Baseball Team from Worst to First. Why? Well, because up until today, the book most often associated with the former Tampa Bay Devil Rays was my own first book, Stadium for Rent, Tampa Bay's Quest for Major League Baseball. That was published in 1993. They didn't even exist then. But going forward, I think that Keri's book will be the one that captures the renamed Tampa Bay Rays franchise and will ultimately be remembered for the recognition it brought to the business and baseball management philosophy developed by Stuart Sternberg, Matt Silverman, and Andrew Friedman. The Extra 2% is this year's version of Moneyball, if you will, the book about the Oakland A's, how they made more from less. It's a book with a real story, The Extra 2% is. It's a beginning, it's got a middle, an end. It's got heroes and goats, and a pretty happy conclusion, I think, for any baseball fan, but us Rays fans in particular. Now, I hereby cede the title of author of the best book about the Tampa Bay Rays baseball franchise to Jonah Keri. Jonah, welcome to Mr. Media.
Bob, it's a pleasure to be here. If I'm number one, then let's make you 1A, because Stadium for Rent was a great tool that I used in my research and enjoyed it immensely.
Well, you're a good man, but I've read your book. You don't need to do that. You got the title. Here it is, folks. You'll have seen it already, but the Extra 2%. Really, I got to gush a little bit here, but it's a really, really fine read. You know, you never know. There was another book recently that had some. How should we say? It borrowed some material from another book that I had done.
Gotcha.
And borrowed real heavily, and I was not very impressed. I'm not going to name it. People can do their research. This book. It's a terrific book. It's a really good read. You should be very proud of it. I know it started off out of the box. It's selling very well. I'm very happy for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think that the key to me was to try to do a holistic look, and I think that I had to start with a lot of the themes that you touched on way back in the 90s, really looking at how the franchise even came to be before we get to Evan Longoria and David Price and all this stuff. I think you can't tell the story of the new Rays without getting into what happened with the old Devil Rays, because really it's part and parcel. We're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think the Arizona Diamondbacks story is quite as interesting, the backstory.
And they have a World Series, so there you go.
Yeah, and they ultimately wound up in terrible debt. So, you know, while people were enjoying them at the time, they had to pay a price that, you know, all the teams do in some way. Now, I got to ask you, there are a million great stories to tell in sports, and especially in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Why on earth would a guy not from Tampa Bay invest at least a year of his life, maybe two, I'm not sure, on the story of the Tampa Bay Rays, the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, as they used to be called?
2+ years, as a matter of fact. And the simplest reason is that the publisher called me up and said, hey, why don't you write a book about the Tampa Bay Rays? And I said, sure, okay. The broader reason is because I have kind of a dual background in business and sports. Covered the stock market for 11 plus years for Investors Business Daily, and I've also written about baseball for ESPN.com and the Wall Street Journal and New York Times and Baseball Prospectus and Fangraphs and all that. So, the self-deprecating version of this would be they couldn't get Michael Lewis, so they chose Jonah Keri. That's basically But the longer version is had that dual background, and to me it was an interesting and compelling topic. Not all books have to be about the Yankees and the Red Sox, and if anything, here's an underdog. You talk about David slaying Goliath. They beat the Yankees and the Red Sox. They do it with a much smaller payroll and with innovative analytical kind of methods, and I do have that background as well. I'm a numbers guy and maybe a little bit of a thinker, for better or for worse. And this was that team, too. I mean, this was a team that really thought about everything that they did, and I don't only mean that in the on-base percentage way. I mean in thinking about how you scout, and thinking about the business side, too. How do you run stadium operations or do post-game concerts or whatever? Everything that they do is all about getting that extra 2% edge, and I found that very, very compelling.
It's interesting to me. Earlier today, I did an interview with Ken Blanchard, who wrote the 1 Minute Manager and just a real famous business management consultant. And we were talking about Southwest Airlines and how Southwest, there have been several books written about Southwest. Herb Kelleher wrote Nuts. He was involved with Nuts. There's a new,
I read that.
There's a new one that Blanchard and Colleen Barrett, the former president of Southwest, have written, where they basically do everything but make the secret sauce for their competitors. They tell them exactly how they do it, and yet no one is able to really copy them in the United States. Did you find in your research that the Rays figured out their own kind of secret sauce that may or may not be replicable by others?
They did, to the point that they granted some access, but they certainly didn't give exclusive or hardcore access, I would say. To their credit, by the way, it's intellectual property. If you're the CEO of Google, why do you want someone peeking behind the curtain to learn what your algorithm is? You don't want that. And the Rays understood that. They do a good job of it. It's funny about what the secret sauce is. I think it can be oversimplified a little bit. In Moneyball, there was a very simple to understand narrative, and part of that goes to Michael Lewis being a fantastic, amazing writer. He can really boil things down to their essence and make it very entertaining, even if it would seem dry. A small market baseball club or a stock market crash or whatever. This isn't sunshine and lollipops and vampire novels. I mean, this is something that's not necessarily for the masses, but he does it very well. And in the case of the Rays, it's hard to come up with that one point. And I didn't really try to do that in the book. To me, their secret sauce is, again, that 2%, and that's in everything. So if they come up with defensive ideas, maybe it's just a little bit before the competition, and it's not anything major so much as they're looking at slightly different metrics than everybody else. Or one great example to give you, for instance, is it's the idea of how much collaboration there is in the organization. So Joe Madden, the manager, is as open-minded and intellectually curious as anybody that you'll find. And what he does is he meets directly with the members of what they call the R&D staff, which is crazy for baseball teams. They have an R&D staff. They meet in Madden's office and they have all these ideas. So one time they said, hey, Mike Mussina is killing us. Right-handed pitcher, very good, certainly, but just killing them beyond normal Mike Mussina performance. What if we take right-handed batters against this right-handed pitcher and try it, because he's really smoking our left-handed hitters? They try it, next game, they light him up. They do it against Tim Wakefield, same thing, they light him up. John Danks, a left-hander for the White Sox, ultimately this came to be called the Danks theory, even though it could have been the Mussina theory. They lit him up too. So they figured something out here, that these reverse split pitchers, which is a very inside baseball kind of term, but the basic idea is do something different than the norm, and it can work out in your favor. That needed to have the collaboration of different departments within this company, so to speak, and that's something that the Rays do very, very well, maybe better than any team in baseball.
Did you find there to be like a kind of an underrated element of the Rays' success and as well an overrated element?
I think that one is a collaboration, but two is delegation. That really is a hallmark of any good business too. If you're talking about Southwest or any, and I know this is often a business podcast, that's very important. And Vince Namoli, the former owner of the Devil Rays, who I know you know very well.
My buddy.
Not a master delegator, that man. He ruled with an iron fist and wanted things his way. Some there occasionally would work out in their favor. He did do the job of getting the team there, and then there were some things that he did well. But Rick Dodge, who was a famous figure who helped get the team to Tampa Bay in the first place, he compared Namoli to General Patton. He said General Patton was great in wartime, terrible in peacetime. Could not manage things when they were prosperous or even potentially prosperous. And Stu Sternberg, the new owner, is totally the opposite of that. He has no problem letting go, to the point actually where he actually gets criticized a little bit because he doesn't live in the Tampa Bay area.
Right.
He entrusts his lieutenants. Matt Silverman, who's his right-hand man, is the team president, runs the club, all the way down to, stadium operations, concessions managers, even interns. Everybody has a responsibility, and it's a given that they're going to do the job. If you hire properly and you instill them with the tools to succeed, they're going to succeed. Sternberg understands that, and that's part of the reason that this whole franchise, on the field and off the field, and I know off the field they will get some criticism, but for the most part has been much more successful than the past regime.
Well, and we're going to take a break in a minute or two, and when we come back, I want to talk to you about Namoli and Dodge and Sternberg more particularly. Is Tampa Bay as a market really any different than other small markets trying to make a go of it, like Kansas City or Pittsburgh?
Well, somewhat. Pittsburgh, first of all, maybe has the most beautiful stadium in all of baseball. You cannot discount how important that is. Tropicana Field is, charitably a dump, and it's in a terrible location. I think that cannot be really overstated how important that is. You're talking about a stadium that has fewer people within a 30-minute drive than any other ballpark in baseball. I think it's something like 19% of the population lives within a 30-minute drive. It's terrible. So you're at a big, big disadvantage. You know how the stadium is. There's a peninsula around it. There are sky bridges. And then there's a psychological issue where people won't come across the bridge from the other side, from Hillsborough County or even, outlying regions, Brandon or Dunedin. All those things are mostly out of bounds. Even though if it was just a normal flat grid and you were in Texas, you could probably drive 40 minutes and not bat an eyelash. It's a big problem. Geographically, that's a problem. And I think the market itself, the economy is not great in Missouri or Pennsylvania, but it's actually better than it is in the Tampa Bay area. You know that. 12 to 13% unemployment. I mean, you even had the oil spill had some impact on the Gulf, concerns about the beaches. And I don't want to say that this is a negative because it's not at all a negative to me, but the point is the local populace has a pretty strong anti-tax sentiment. That exists all over the country. It's not unique to Florida, but I think it's pretty darn strong in the Tampa Bay region between the demographics of it and the politics of it and where we are in 2011 with the country. So when you're not willing to support public works or taxes or whatever, for better or for worse, you could say for better. That's certainly the case. But that means, bottom line, you're not going to get a new ballpark. And that is a problem that doesn't exist in Pittsburgh. And even Kansas City has a renovated park and quite a nice one, actually.
One more question, and we'll go to break. And I'll caution you probably be a little short with this answer, but
I'll try.
I would maintain that with the factors that you mentioned, politics, the economy sucks, very high unemployment in this area at the moment. As bad as those things are, I don't know that there's a lot of markets around the country that do not already have baseball that would be willing to drop or set aside $500 million to build a new stadium. Am I wrong? I mean, Charlotte can't do it. Las Vegas is a hurting town. Orlando is not in the shape that it was 3 or 4 years ago. If the worst were to happen here and Tampa Bay couldn't build a stadium in the next couple of years and Sternberg is not willing to wait for the economy to get better, is there really another place to go? Or,
Yeah, not necessarily. I think that you're talking about a situation where the term the stalking horse, it used to be that St. Pete was the stalking horse, right, where teams would move. And I agree there aren't that many good ones. I would add that it's what you outlined. It's Sternberg losing patience. Is he willing to wait it out for a new ballpark? Because in terms of what the day-to-day is, this team, Sternberg buys in, $65 million, gets majority control in 2005. They're worth more than $300 million on paper, according to Forbes right now. They turn a profit every year. They've won 2 of the last 3 AL East titles. It's a great story. They're actually doing fine by all objective measures. This whole idea of they need a new ballpark is a little overstated. Does he want a new ballpark? Well, of course he does, because you're basically getting a gift from the government and from the taxpayers. But, if they go along the line, it takes a few years, that's fine. They're not going to move. The concern is if Sternberg sells or says, I've had enough, and sells, if he goes, maybe Silverman and Friedman and everybody else goes, and they lose all the brain power. And without the brain power, you have a market that's not that huge, bad park, bad location, going against the Red Sox and Yankees, and maybe you go back to being a last-place club. That is the apocalyptic scenario for this franchise.
Fair enough. I would not disagree with that. Let's take a quick break, Jonah, and when we come back, we'll talk about some of the personalities involved in the book. This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to and hopefully watching the Mr. Media interview with sportswriter Jonah Keri. His new book is The Extra 2%, how Wall Street Strategies took a Major League Baseball team from worst to first. And we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Williams. There's so many things kids have to be good at these days. It's hard to stop and think about how something like learning music can help them in the future. Music helps kids because it's a performing art, and children need to learn to perform well so they can succeed in society. Getting an 85% on a math test is pretty good, but hitting 85% of the right notes during a concert isn't good enough for most music students or their teachers. A special kind of practice and preparation goes into the discipline of performing music, and it helps kids develop habits that will allow them to perform better in all areas of their lives.
A PSA brought to you by MENC, the National Association for Music Education, and the National Anthem Project, the campaign to restore America's voice through music education. March is Music in Our Schools Month.
Hi, this is Kurt Smith from Tears for Fears, and yes, I'm to blame for Mr. Media being married. Sorry, girls.
This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to and hopefully watching the Mr. Media interview with sportswriter Jonah Keri, whose new book is The Extra 2%, How Wall Street Strategies Took a Major League Baseball Team from Worst to First. Now, while we were away, we took a little break.
I'm noticing props.
Yeah. I did a few things here. We have the original yard sign.
Wow.
From the season ticket drive, bringing it home. Now that was from the second drive. Of course, the first one there was one before it, and I wanted to be more comfortable here, so I'm also wearing my
oh, very nice
original season Rays shirt.
Wardrobe change. Wow.
Yep, wardrobe change. I've never done that for anyone else.
Well done.
And let's see, we have some other things very important here to any Rays fan. Of course, I have my Josh Hamilton bobblehead.
I have a Jason Tyner bobblehead. I think I win.
Did you get, really?
Yes.
Do you know what they did with those?
Yes, I do, and I wrote about it in the book, and they were so enchanted by that part of the book that the Rays sent me a Jason Tyner bobblehead. It's in deep storage in an educational facility somewhere in, I don't know where, Pinellas County.
They are at the Enterprise Village.
Yeah, right.
And you know what? I had wanted one of those for years. Mm-hmm. And when my daughter was in 6th grade, I went out there as a chaperone, not knowing, and they have this little shop, and the kids earn money, and then they can buy things at various CVS or McDonald's, whatever, and they were giving out Jason Tyner bobbleheads to kids who, earned their money and bought them, and I'm like, dang, I said, how can I get one? And they said, you can't. You just can't.
I tried to create a scenario whereby we could buy, because they had 10,000 because they didn't give them away at the game because Jason Tyner famously got demoted to the minor leagues before his own bobblehead day. Yeah. This is how bad the Tampa Bay Devil Rays were. And I tried to come up with a scenario whereby I could buy all 10,000 and give them away as swag with the book. That, people could, if they, specially order it on, I don't know, whatever, that they could do it that way. I thought it would be the coolest thing ever, or send it to bookstores or something, but it's, even if we buy them for a small amount, it's still 10,000 times something, which is quite a bit of money.
It was a great idea, though. Great promotional thinking.
Let
me see, what else do we have here? We have the Raymond bobblehead.
Nice.
I love Raymond. I think Raymond was, in those early years, one of the best things that they did was create this bizarre
the
character.
Story behind Raymond, right? Vincent Namoli's brother was named Raymond.
Right.
The mascot was named after, and he was very near and dear to his heart. And a key part of the book, by the way, because Raymond was one guy who could match Vince's personality when he could stand up to him. Chuck Lamar, for instance, didn't do it great, a very good scout, but just not a strong personality the way Raymond was, and he was really missed in more ways than one by the franchise and by the man when he passed away.
I'll tell you something about Raymond that did not make it into your book.
Mm-hmm.
That is that within a couple weeks of Raymond's debut, may have even been a day or two, they started having him meet the kids at a little table downstairs in the bottom part of the trop, and so I took my daughter down there. She loved Raymond, and I took her down there, and they videotaped her as like the first kid who met Raymond. And for the balance of the season, whenever they showed video of kids getting autographs, that was my kid.
Oh, well done.
How about that? So let me see, what else do I have here? Wait a minute. Oh, we have this, the trop This is an official replica of the Trop with
retractable roof, if only.
And if anyone actually saw my book, Stadium for Rent, they the photo on the cover. It was horrible. I don't even know where they got it. They didn't get it from me. They ran a photo of the Trop, the model of the Trop, without the roof on it. So it's completely not recognizable. Anywhere else in the world, they know this is the most ugly, it's the ugliest stadium in the world. But no, on the cover of my book, Stadium for Rent, no such thing. Wait a minute. Let's see. Okay.
That's solid.
Got the hat. Okay. Which does not fit over the headphones, so I'm doing it for show momentarily. And the most important thing that any Tampa Bay Rays fan has to have?
Cowbell.
Drive some crazy. And I'll get in the plug. Thank you, T.G. Lee.
Very nice.
All right, so anyway. 2 words. Albert Pujols.
Yeah.
I love that story. Tell that story to folks.
So we've read a couple of excerpts of the book. ESPN.com has one. That's the one about Albert Pujols. Deadspin.com has one about Vince Naimoli. And we ran one at GQ, which is kind of a general, it's about arbitrage and about business concepts. And yeah, we got a great response from the ESPN.com excerpt, and I hope that people, when they read the extra 2%, they'll enjoy the story. There's a scout named Fernando Arango. He used to be with the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. He goes to Missouri, scouts this kid. Nobody's heard of this kid. It's not a hotbed at the time where he's scouting. Shortstop, huge shortstop, way too big to play shortstop, but athletic, in his opinion, the scout's opinion, athletic, a real future, big power hitter, hitting balls into the trees, everything looks good. Introduced, no problem, Spanish-speaking kid, everything is good rapport. They go to the next tournament. There's some people there. There's some scouts, and things are starting to happen, but Arango is a little bit apprehensive and nervous, but he thinks he still has a chance. He had an early rapport with this kid. Fine. They meet at a Denny's in another city, actually. Then they drive down to the Trop to do a tryout. According to Arango, this kid hits a ball off the foul pole and makes unbelievable plays. He's never caught in his life. Takes the catcher's mitt and all the equipment, pops out of his stance and throws down to second base very quickly. Just shows athleticism. Everything looks good. According to Dan Jennings, the scouting director at the time, bad body, terrible hitting approach, dipping his shoulder, stone hands, can't do anything right. This is the same guy. This is Rashomon taking place at Tropicana Field for you Kurosawa fans. And what inevitably happens is when the time comes for the draft, Arango says you have to draft this guy early. If not first round, then soon. First round, no. Second round, no. Third round, no. Even if there's disagreement, Fernando Arango vowed that this guy would hit 40 home runs. He was convinced of it in the major leagues, in a season. I don't mean in his career, in a season. They're going along, nothing's happening, 10th, 11th, 12th. Finally, in the 13th round, 402nd pick of the draft, the St. Louis Cardinals take a flyer on a pudgy kid from Missouri named Albert Pujols. And as the story goes, Arango quit his job over it because he was so disappointed in what happened. This is before Pujols went nuts, by the way. Mm-hmm. Quits his job and puts champagne on ice. He leaves it in his icebox forever. And he says, when the time comes and this kid grows into a major league player and finally hits 40 home runs in the big leagues, I'm going to pop this champagne and I'm going to drink it with my wife. And they stay friendly, they stay in contact. Pujols calls him the night before a game, or the day before that night's game. Sitting on 39 home runs, he says, it's going to happen. Hits 2 home runs that game, calls him back after the game and says, you can pop the champagne now. I've got my 40 home runs. You hear these stories in baseball, and there's so much romance and stuff involved. But if you're a Devil Rays fan, there's no romance. You're thinking, why did we get Albert Pujols? That's what you're thinking.
Yeah, previously, I actually, and maybe it's just with time I have forgotten, I'd never heard that story. I can't remember hearing that story. And when I read it in the book, I went, oh, and you, this is one of the great keys to this book and why people really need to get this book. You build the drama to it.
I don't mention his name.
No.
For the whole story, I don't mention his name. I just say he's a pudgy kid, the player, the kid. I mean, I guess you could probably figure it out after a while, but it does take a while to get it right. There's suspense involved.
Yeah. Oh, it's a very good storytelling there.
Thank you.
Speaking of good storytelling, let's talk a little bit about the king, at least in his mind, Vincent J. Naimoli, the man who landed Tampa Bay the franchise when no one else could do it. Also the man who I understand turned water into wine.
He did. Very successful in that respect, and we'll let you know about it. Yeah, the thing about Vince Naimoli is he was very successful in the business world before he ultimately bought the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. He was what you call a turnaround specialist. Now, he did this with widget companies, with glass makers, with companies that made items, hard, faceless items that could be sold. It's not a public trust to own a glass company or a container company or anything like that. You're just trying to squeeze profits, and that's all you care about. So being thrifty and being very aggressive in your business model and what have you, that can work. You're just talking about the bare bones, how can I get a profit margin? No problem. Can't do that with a baseball team. You can have a baseball team that has bargains and shops well and does things like that. And the New Rays are an example of that. But you can't go nuts with squeezing pennies, and you can't antagonize your employees. And this is what Vince Naimoli did. Famous for that, a reign of terror. One story which comes out in the book, there's a lot of stories in that Naimoli. More stories per capita in that chapter than any other for sure. One of them is he didn't allow outside food. And this was just a cheapskate move, flat out. And by the way, many teams don't allow outside food. So it's not just him. But the way that he enforced it, Bob, this was the thing. Ticket takers and ushers were taught to confiscate things or they'd be fired right away. And there's one famous story where an old folks home, they load up a bus, they go to a ball game. Wife and husband go up to the front of they're going to walk into the stadium. Wife's in a wheelchair. They're 80 years old. And she's relatively infirm. She's got a little bag of cashew nuts. 15, 20 cashew nuts in the bag. This story has been told before, but it's just killed me when I heard about it. And the usher, the ticket taker, basically says, no, you can't bring that in there. Husband starts arguing. Fight ensues. Wife says, I'm going to pass out. I could go into shock if I don't. No. So they kick them out. They can't go into the stadium. All their friends from the old folks home are at the game. They go back to the bus. The sweltering bus, you know how the Florida heat is. For 3.5, 4 hours, they sit there and wait for everybody to come back, and finally they return. In the grand scheme of things, it's one story. It wouldn't make that big a difference. And I think if Vince Naimoli had goodwill and somehow was just a rogue ticket taker, it would have been no problem. But because he had such a bad reputation, they buried him for it. He burned his bridges almost right off the bat with the local media, to the point where it was antagonistic, not quite from day one, but definitely from day two, and then pretty much for the next 8 years in a row. It was really, really a tough situation for the locals and for Naimoli, too. I mean, there was a lot of backlash, self-inflicted backlash, but I'm sure he didn't feel comfortable in that situation either.
Well, and of course, the funny thing is, and you tell this story, and I remember this very well, not only could you not bring food in, if you were a reporter, you couldn't buy food and bring it in. It's there was the story of the reporter who got a pizza, paid money, put money in Vince's pocket because I guess he didn't want to eat the food that was. People don't know this, I guess, but the sports writers and the media are provided food at these games that they cover because it's tradition and it keeps them where they need to be and not wandering around. So this one reporter, I guess he just decided he wanted pizza that day, and he went out and he bought a pizza. He paid Vince and the Rays for pizza, and Vince just had a meltdown over pizza. But the number of, Vince meltdowns, you have the story of him throwing the St. Pete Times out, the high school band that he wanted them to buy their own tickets. Endless. It was so wonderful to see you capture all these stories in one place.
I tried, and the thing is, I'm an outsider, Bob. I mean, we've talked about this. I live in New Hampshire, which is, 1,500 miles away, and I'd only been to the area a couple of times, period. And to go in, I really tried to just learn everything that I could. I think there's some advantages to being an outsider in some ways because you're not too close to the story. You don't have biases. Maybe you bring a fresh set of eyes. But by the same token, there's a learning curve. And I had lunch with Mark Topkin and Mark Lancaster, who was covering the sport at the time. And I talked to the mayor a lot. I was in the mayor's office quite a bit, actually, in the St. Pete City Hall. Just did a lot of that stuff, a lot of really just boots on the ground, just getting to know the old-timers because you needed to have that information. There were basic things that I didn't know. And some things, I guess, you talk about being an outsider. When you go over the Howard Franklin Bridge from St. Pete to Tampa, there's a sign immediately that says, George Steinbrenner Field up ahead. It used to be called Legends Field, not George Steinbrenner Field. Right. I mean, for you, if you cross the bridge or anybody else, I'm sure it's like seeing a red light. It's nothing. But for me, I said, are you telling me that as soon as you leave the area, as soon as you leave St. Pete, they're actually marking their territory and declaring it the domain of the New York Yankees? I just thought that was an amazing thing, and I reported in the book. And if you live in St. Pete, so who cares? It's a dumb story. If you live anywhere else, you'd say, really? They're actually on the doorstep of the New York Yankees, even though the Yankees theoretically play also 1,500 miles away. I thought that was a very, very interesting little tidbit and indicative of the kind of rivalry that goes on locally.
Well, and I hadn't thought about it in this context before. I used to criticize the Rays a lot for not putting up billboards in Hillsborough County promoting games and teams and stuff. And now that you mention it that way, I'm thinking that may have had something to do with Steinbrenner. He may have found some way to keep them out of there. But then again, they didn't put billboards up in Orlando either, which I always thought was kind of dopey. This was under Namoli. I know that Sternberg has done things differently.
They have not capitalized on Orlando enough, by the way. The Sentinel never covers the team. It's a very strange relationship because Orlando's not far away and a huge population base, even south of Orlando. And they're just not. They tried to capitalize on it. They played a series out there in the Wild World of Sports complex. Right. And it just didn't take for whatever reason, which is too bad. Because if they're only restricted to fans in St. Pete, that's a fraction of the area. You're talking about Port Charlotte all the way out to Orlando should all theoretically be in play, but it really isn't, unfortunately.
I'm hoping, frankly, I hate to say it because I love St. Pete and I love having the team 5 minutes away. I'm frankly hoping that folks in Tampa and St. Pete and Clearwater behind the scenes, which is a little difficult under the sunshine laws here, put their heads together, find a way to cooperatively raise the money and put the team just across the water in Tampa somewhere, because otherwise it's just not going to happen. And it's just realistically, St. Pete can't do it.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, I don't know why St. Pete would go for that, because the problem, you've got them in an ironclad lease and all the revenue is going to the city, even if it's, right across the water I'm okay with, but it almost seems like it has to be on the St. Pete side, because otherwise Sternberg would have to pay the city a huge bounty to get out of it. St. Pete has no motivation to cede the team to Tampa or Brandon or anywhere else. There would have to be some serious negotiations. Maybe I'm wrong, and I don't live there, but having done the research and certainly having talked to the former mayor, and I know the current mayor shares the same view, they're not going to give it up without a fight, and I don't blame them.
Well, the economy is such that it may as it's doing in all kinds of things all around the country. I think eventually it's going to change the rules for how that decision is ultimately made.
Yeah, well, Tampa's got their own problem with the Buck Stadium too. This is not an easy scenario.
No, and as I said, I don't think there's a lot of cities lying in wait anymore. There's no stalking horse, really.
That's right.
There's people who'd like to have a team for their community. I understand that, but well, look, I could go on talking about this for hours. It's been my book came out 18 years ago. I worked on it starting in 1990, I think. So this has been a part of my life for a long time. I'm going to hold your book up again. I'm very happy to turn over responsibility for the legend that is the Tampa Bay Rays and Devil Rays to you, my friend. And folks, listen, you can find Jonah Keri's new book, The Extra 2%, How Wall Street Strategies Took a Major League Baseball Team from Worst to First, at great bookstores everywhere, or you can order it online right now at a great price at MrMedia.com. Also, check out Jonah Keri's cleverly titled podcast, it's called Jonah Keri's Podcast. You can check that out at Jonah Keri, it's JONAHKERI.com, where you can subscribe for free on iTunes. And Jonah Keri, thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today.
Thank you for having me, Bob. In 18 years, I hope that we both get to pass the torch to the next ingenue who will write a great book about the Tampa Bay Rays.
Fair enough. And folks, listen, for more original interviews with your favorite sports writers, surf over to our main website, mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. Subscribe to Mr. Media on iTunes, and you'll never miss a show. Just search Mr. Media Interviews from within iTunes and subscribe for free. You can also listen, as my friend Jonah does in New Hampshire, with a piece of string and a tin can in many locations. If you've got an idea for a guest, you've got a comment on today's show, or would like to advertise on Mr. Media, email me directly at bob@mrmedia.com, and you can follow Mr. Media on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Thanks so much for joining us today. Always appreciate you giving up a little piece of your day and spending it with Mr. Media. Thanks for watching. Bye, everybody.